Welcome back to Tiny Blue Games. My name is, of course, Csaw or Chris, and today we're talking about Guild Wars 2 in 2022. Today we're kind of doing a follow-up to the most recent Guild Wars 2 video I did that was talking about the future of Guild Wars 2 and was really focused on the highlight of Arenanet confirming the 4th expansion to eventually come for Guild Wars 2. However, in that same blog post, they talked about the fact that Living World Season 1 would be returning to Guild Wars 2, and since then it has been added to the game. And I'll be honest, at the time, I kind of thought it was small news. I was like, oh my god, there's going to be a 4th expansion, and there's going to be hard modes for all these strike missions that are coming out, and also, yay, Season 1's going to come out again. I don't know. It's a conversation that's gone on in the Guild Wars 2 community for a really long time. You know, hey, we're not able to play this old content that was in the game, we should bring it back. And I always believed that. I always saw the value of it for new players who didn't understand the story beats and stuff like that. But I'll be honest, I was someone who was a bit more selfish. I was like, yeah, it would be fun to have that content, but I'd rather the resources go to new content I haven't played before. That was kind of my opinion on it, until I actually stepped back and played the Living World content. And that's what you'll be seeing in this video. I'm going through playing Flame and Frost, or Frost and Flame, I forget which way it's put, but the first episode of Living World Season 1, and wow, it was a trip down memory lane. It's actually so long ago that we did this. And in the first episode, we deal with... Actually, okay, before I begin, if you're someone who doesn't want spoilers on anything, this video will have spoilers, so just a heads up there. But diving in, we get introduced to two characters. We get introduced to Rox and Bram. And these are two very important characters. They come up throughout pretty much all of the expansions, all of the Living Worlds after this. They're pretty main characters. And this is our introduction to them. And even as someone who played this originally, all of a sudden I feel much more connected to these two characters because they're anchored so well to existing characters. I mean, first off, for Bram, Air's still alive. We're hearing Air, talk and their own relationship going on and stuff like that. It really anchors Bram as a character. Rox is a bit more new, but we do have Ritlock, who, is someone we know quite well, and we have that connection point. And just getting to know them kind of on their own, we kind of do a few missions with Rox, a few missions with Bram, and then the final one kind of puts them together and really shows how well they work together. In addition to that, we also get to see Frostbite and where Frostbite came from. I couldn't remember, if Rox just already had Frostbite, but the creature came from the first mission, which is so cool. It's a really well done story that brings all these characters together. So obviously this is going to be very important for people who haven't seen any of these story elements, right? This is kind of the framework for the whole set of characters that you deal with throughout a lot of the future content in Guild Wars 2. But as a veteran player who's played this content before, I think it was the first time I kind of experienced nostalgia. I was like, oh yeah, I remember doing this mission. Oh yeah, I remember doing that. It was so fun. I got to go back to Disa Plateau and explore all around there. And it was just such a fun time to go back and do it. And, it was a lot more enjoyable than I thought. The other part is it really ties two fractals into the real world. So you have the kind of that final mission where you go into the Flame and Frost, the actual mine area, right? And man, is that a much bigger instance than I remember. So there's the two fractal portions. The very first one is entering the tunnel and going through the steam, and then you fight kind of like the robotic room of traps and stuff like that, and that's kind of one fractal. The second fractal, and this one has changed over time, but is very focused on the boss fight with the two awesome bosses that go flying in. And I remember the first time I was in there and saw those bosses flying, and I was like, wow, this is huge for Guild Wars 2. Because it was huge for Guild Wars 2 at the time. It was a really big step in the right direction for boss design and a really fun, engaging way to do it. So it was just really fun to see that. And then to see all of the story content anchoring those two instances into the real, the actual cinematic world of Guild Wars 2, and seeing where Bram and Rox fit into it, which I think if you're someone who came into the game afterwards and didn't play it and just kind of were popped into those instances and we're like, huh, this is interesting, you're not going to have that connection to things. And it's going to kind of feel a bit, I don't know, just random, right? And that makes sense. I mean, the Fractals of the Mist, if there was one place for things that feel random, Fractals of the Mist kind of makes sense. But it makes me really want to like integrate more parts of the game. It got me thinking about Final Fantasy XIV, and this is always what happens when I start playing multiple different MMOs at the same time, is I look at what one game does really well and what other games could do. Well, Final Fantasy XIV pretty much makes you go through all story content, unless you buy a skip or something like that. But if you're just progressing normally through the game, you're going to be doing all of the story content. Whereas Guild Wars 2, there's a lot of player choice, right? You're presented with different ways to go through the game, and that even comes to the expansions, right? You can flat out not go through Heart of Thorns or Path of Fire and go right to End of Dragons, and you're gonna miss some stuff. And it just makes me wonder if there's better ways that they could present this story and have players go through it so that they know all of the story steps. And to be fair, at the start of End of Dragons, they did a really good summary video that kind of catches you up and kind of like gives you all of the story beats you need to know to really understand the story. But let's be honest, it's not gonna be as much of an impact if you haven't actually played through all that content. So it makes me wonder if there's a system that could be developed where you can mix in some of the past expansions or living story content into the leveling process for new players. And I'm not saying, completely remove the leveling process, because the leveling process of Guild Wars 2 is one of my favorite things ever. But if there was a way that, you could really tie it to it, or maybe once you get to 80, one of the best ways to get a bunch of mastery XP would be to do like the living world or something like that and have it be more streamlined into the actual player experience, not have people have to pay extra for it. I know it ruins all sorts of monetization and how they've actually set things up. I'm going way out there with my theories at this point, but I think that would be one of the most important things they could do, is make it, very obvious that players should go through these story steps in an order. And then, yes, still have choice, because I think one of the negative parts for Final Fantasy XIV is that you are essentially going through everything or skipping a bunch of it. I think there is a lot of advantage in Guild Wars 2 side of being able to choose which expansion you want to go into. It just becomes difficult because then you're introduced to story elements in such a random order. I don't know if there's a best way to do it, because then you go back to World of Warcraft, where they now have, you get to level 10 and you choose which expansion you want to go through. And that's kind of interesting, right? But then you're missing out on so much additional content. It's one of these things that's going to impact every single MMO. It's got, a bloat thing, right? Where the more expansions you have, the more chapters you have, the more stories you have, the harder it is to actually have people go through it, especially if they're entering the game as a new player. And that's something you have to consider, because yes, you can try and keep your current players happy and keep progressing that way. But if the actual intake of new players isn't very enjoyable, you're going to be, really struggling to maintain that population. And that's why ultimately I think Guild Wars 2, announcing they're going to do a 4th expansion is huge. Announcing they're doing a bunch of optimizations like DirectX 13 and all that, or DirectX 11, I guess. I don't know. Don't quote me on that. The newest DirectX change. A bunch of optimizations, and then they're actually introducing Season 1 content. I think at first I didn't understand the importance of it. I was like, cool, it's great to have old content back, but is that like the most important thing? I think it is. Playing through it, I'm like, yeah, having a foundation that's very, that it's at least all there is huge. And that's the first step. Once they have everything there, and that's the other thing, they're anyone who has an account, you get the Season 1 content. So they're giving it to people, which is great too. I think there's more they could do for living story content in terms of packaging it within expansions. Like, I think there's a very easy package they could have that would have, all of the expansions except for the most recent one and all of the living world in like one package that's like, hey, get this as a first step. And it's like, a pretty reasonable price. And then once someone's like fully caught up through the game, then you can pay the premium price for the most recent expansion if you want it. Like, I think that would be the best way to do it. And then kind of continuously add the, the past expansion into that bucket and have the most recent one there. It's kind of what World of Warcraft did back in the day, I think, too, with their battle chest, right? And I think a lot of games do work that way, is where they do that. Anyways, this video got all over the place. The big thing I wanted to say, if you're someone who has played Guild Wars 2 and weren't there for Season 1 and have been playing through the most recent expansions and you thought that they've been enjoyable, but you've wanted to have a bit more color, a bit more detail, and a bit more understanding for some of these characters, and specifically for Bram, who does some pretty out there things and has some pretty big mood shifts throughout the storylines, I think you should play this. I didn't think it was going to be that important or that impactful, but I really enjoyed it. And it was, it was an hour and a half of gameplay, I'd say, for the first episode. So it was not an all-day affair, but it was a sizable enough piece of content that I was like, wow, that was a pretty fun playset. Like, that was something to do, sink my teeth into. So it was fun. It was fun. But yeah, at the end of the day, I think Guild Wars 2 is doing a really great job of setting themselves up to succeed in the future. And that's what makes me really excited. But yeah, thanks for watching the video. I am a Guild Wars 2 or Arenanet partner. Does that mean I don't say anything bad about Guild Wars 2? No, I say the good, I say the bad. What it does mean is if you are interested in Guild Wars 2, you will find 2 referral or sponsored links in the description box below. If you're a new player and want to try out Guild Wars 2, there's one to try out for free. And if you are someone who wants to buy the newest expansion or any of the expansions, there's a referral link for that as well. Both links do help out the channel, so if you are interested, please check those out. If not, thanks for watching and have a great rest of your day.